Back in the 1800s, a popular form of entertainment in the United States, known as minstrel shows, spread throughout the world. That's when a white man would pretend to be a black man by donning makeup commonly known as blackface. Although it persisted for about 100 years, today it's considered repugnant. And yet there's one highly sophisticated art form where a form of this practice persisted even into the 21st century.
When I go to the opera and I see Aida and Otello, two very well-known Verdi operas, or I look at Madama Butterfly and Turandot, two Puccini operas, I notice that even in the new millennium and even up through today in 2018, you will see people who are not of the particular race and ethnic background being cast in those roles. But the fact that you had an element of blackface makeup or yellow face makeup happening on a stage in the United States and throughout the world, it seems, where the opera tradition is happening, and nobody seemed to be commenting on it. And this really became a strong issue for me in the early 2000s.
That's Naomi Andre, Associate Professor of Afro-American and African Studies at the University of Michigan, and author of Black Opera: History, Power, Engagement.
Minstrelsy in the United States. So minstrelsy comes from the 1820s, late 20s, 1830s, and it's a very negative style of white people putting on burnt cork and blackface and these big smiles and white gloves, imitating in a negative way a bunch of characters who've become stock characters in American culture. The Sambo, who is the happy-go-lucky, I don't do anything black man. The Buck, who is the big black man who wants to physically abuse and rape women. The Mammy, who is the black woman who takes care of children. There was a sort of a figure on the old Aunt Jemima pancakes batter with her wearing a kerchief, a red and white checkered kerchief. So that comes out of this Aunt Jemima, takes care of white people's children, and who knows what her children are doing to fend for themselves. And the Jezebel is the last of these big characters, who is a black woman who is this hypersexualized woman who just wants to be sexually used by everybody, particularly white men.
But Andre says the color barrier in opera was broken way back in the 1950s.
I've had the great fortune of speaking with several African American singers, Grace Bumbry, the late Shirley Barrett, George Shirley, and these are singers who were singing in an interesting time period. They're in that first generation of African American singers singing in opera after Marian Anderson very historically broke down the color barrier in 1955. So in the 1960s, the late 50s and 60s, we begin to see more black singers singing on European and American stages.
However, these black singers appeared lighter on stage because the only cosmetic makeup available at the time was from Max Factor, a company that worked closely with Hollywood and the film industry.
And if you think of most of the early movies, they were a lot of non-Black, non-Latino performers. When I've spoken to African American singers, nobody has said that they have to whiten up or wear makeup that makes them appear lighter for a character. However, in reality, the makeups that were available sometimes sort of de facto made singers a little lighter, because the makeups, some of which had, or most of which, the makeup companies were working with movie companies, and so they were used to being on different lighter skin tones. Now, the wonderful thing is how we have makeup for all skin tones, and so it's not such an issue.
But on the cover of Andre's book, a black singer very intentionally wears pale face makeup.
It was a publicity photo from the University of Cape Town Opera Company from a couple of years ago. Novoluso Impofo is the singer, and she is a young South African singer, and she is in costume for Donizetti's opera Maria Stuarda from 1834. The opera talks about the Tudor queens and that Tudor history with Mary Stuart. And as is common when you see plays or works about the Tudor era with Elizabeth and Mary Stuart and other folks, they're frequently dressed or they have a white powder makeup on their face. And you see her dressed in this ornate, beautiful costume as Mary Stuart. Her hair, I think she has a wig, and it's sort of this reddish wig because Mary Stuart was depicted as having red hair, thought to have red hair. Her face is all white, but then you see her hand with her finger by her lips, and you can see that this is a brown hand, an African hand. So it's this very striking image to see such a white face with this makeup, but then you realize, wait a minute, this is not a white person underneath it.
Andre says there's one American opera that must feature black singers, no exceptions. It's George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, written in 1938.
In the contract with the Gershwin estate, if the opera is performed in the United States in a full staged version, you need to have black people in the black character roles. The opera is almost entirely has a black cast with a couple of roles. The policeman and the coroner and the detective are white roles. And there's a big black chorus of Catfish Row. You need to have true to color casting. An interesting element of that contract is if you perform Porgy and Bess as a concert version, so if it's not staged and if you just have an orchestra or a piano and people sort of singing the role standing, then you can have any race and ethnicity sing the roles. Though today it's very unusual to have non-true to color casting for Porgy and Bess.
Opera originated hundreds of years ago as a white European art form, so Andre was amazed to find a thriving opera culture in black South Africa.
This is incredible. This is a country that until 1994 was under this oppressive regime of apartheid, where black people were not allowed to sing opera in opera houses. It was an incredibly racially segregated place. And here I saw a film in 2005 called U Carmen Kailicha, which was a setting of Bizet's opera from 1875, Carmen, but this time translated into Xhosa, one of the South African languages, a click language, which I can't do that well, but I try, Xhosa, and using Bizet's music and set in Kailicha, which is a township right outside of Cape Town. And I thought, what is going on? This is incredible. Is this like a one-time thing, or does this indicate a deeper, longer tradition? And it turns out there were more operas. And it was really, really exciting to go to South Africa, particularly around Cape Town. There's an opera scene in Johannesburg. Durban had been an early scene where they premiered an opera by Khumalo called Princess Magogo. And I noticed that in South Africa, there were productions of Western operas that you could see that looked like Western operas all over the world.
Andre is excited that black stories are now being written and staged for a genre that was once deeply segregated, both here in the United States and in South Africa.
Until recently, these operas reinforce negative stereotypes of black characters usually. But more recently, and I look at from the 1980s in the United States, particularly with the operas of Anthony Davis and his X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X from 1986. He also has an opera, Amistad, from 1997. And there are more operas happening. It's sort of ushering in a new era when there are operas on black topics, the civil rights movement, slavery. Margaret Garner is an historical character who is the real life character behind Toni Morrison's, the main character Seth in Beloved. Toni Morrison worked with Richard Danielpour to write an opera called Margaret Garner in 2005. So I'm finding these new depictions of black Black life, not derived from minstrel negative stereotypes, but actually putting new stories, real, more true to life, three-dimensional, real characters in opera. And I thought, this is really interesting.
And so she just had to write a book about it. You can learn more about our guest, Naomi Andre, and her book, Black Opera, History, Power, Engagement, by visiting our website at viewpointsonline.net. Our show was written and produced by Evan Rook and Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Reed Pence. Our production director is Sean Waldron. I'm Marty Peterson.